All right, we're live here at Buffalo Trace Distillery. It's Whiskey Wednesday with Master Distiller Harlen Wheatley. Harlen, what are we going to be getting into today?
Well, the last couple of weeks, we've been kind of going over the processes and teaching people kind of how we do things and how we make whiskey. And we walk through our cooker room, and then we walk through a fermenter room, talked about fermentation. And really the next step in the process, the logical process, is distillation. So one of the things we do is we ferment, multiple styles and different recipes, and then we'll pump that beer, once it's fermented into beer, we'll pump that beer into different stills. So we at Buffalo Trace are pretty versatile, and that's some of the things that sets us apart is we always want to have a lot of versatility, a lot of flexibility, and we have 9 stills on site. So our capabilities are anywhere from 1 barrel to all the way to thousands of barrels per day, depending on which distillation process we're using. Today, we're going to walk through a little bit some of the stills that we use every day here. This happens to be our experimental still. We put this in 2007, and what's nice about this still, this was cool before experimental stills were cool. We built in a lot of flexibility, a lot of ability to make any kind of product we want. We can ferment all the way, like I said, we can make 1 barrel all the way up to the biggest batch we can make is about 6 barrels. And then we can do multiple batches. But it gives us a lot of flexibility to make any kind of product we want. We could run gin through it, we can make vodka, we can make bourbons and whiskeys, and we use it on a regular basis. We have a full-time operator in here, creating a lot of different whiskeys throughout the year. We're doing multiple recipes. And then once we latch on to something that we really like, then we can scale up from this micro still up to our bigger stills. And we'll walk through the distillation, the big still here now. We'll go over and check it out.
Sounds good.
It's going to be a little louder on this side.
Harlen, I know we got a little bit of a walk here, so it'd be good to maybe talk about some of the joys, challenges, anything in particular about operating a historical distillery like Buffalo Trace Distillery.
Yeah, the nice thing about running a distillery that's been around for 200 plus years, it gives us the ability to have a lot of really good standards and a lot of experience, and we always build on that experience. We take the stills, the still that we're getting ready to tour was put in 1956, and we run it every day. I always give the story about, driving a car, a 1956 Chevy from Kentucky to California and gassing up and turning around and coming back, because we just keep it going all the time.
And that was obviously a smaller still that we looked at, the micro still back there. In comparison, how does it compare to what we're about to see?
Yeah, that still is our smallest still. A typical batch is about 6 barrels. On the still that we're getting ready to see, a typical batch is about 1,000 barrels. And we can switch recipes as we need to, but generally in one day we'll run one recipe and switch for the next. And then we have other stills that we use for vodka and other finishing products. So. What we got going on is all of our whiskeys and bourbons are double distilled. So we run the fermenters through our beer still, and once you get that alcohol into the beer still, we're basically separating the good alcohol, the good whiskey, from the rest of the ingredients. So it'll fall down through those trays. We have 16 trays where we're able to strip out the alcohol, and we condense it upstairs and run it through a tail box. We call them tail boxes. And it's just a wide spot in the pipe where we can get samples and check the proof. And then We drop it into a pot still downstairs. We redistill it again. And it's really a polishing step of our distillation. And we condense again into our tail box, and again get samples and taste and monitor. So one of my tough jobs is every day I have to check the whiskey. It comes off the still depending on the recipe. So today we're making Buffalo Trace. Buffalo Trace is distilled at 140 proof. So this is a 140 proof product. So the idea, it's basically moonshine. So we're making moonshine every day. And that moonshine then, if you make, you start off with a really good quality product, really good whiskey, good balance of recipes, and then you put that in a barrel, and then as it ages, it's picking up those wood sugars and color and tannins and all things from the barrel. So this is really the beginning of the flavor of the whiskey. You're combining the recipe, the fermentation process, the yeast, and all those things together and separating and concentrating them into this whiskey. And then from this point, you take it to the next step for our aging process. This is a 7-foot diameter, biggest still in the business, 7-foot diameter, about 35 foot tall. And again, we're running about 1,000 barrels a day for now. And it just basically never stopped. We started up on Monday morning and shut it down on Sunday night. This column here is used for vodka only. So we're not running it every day. We only run it when we need it. But we're able to distill, from beer in the fermenter all the way up to 190 proof, vodka. It's got 36 trays in it, and we're able to make some really good cuts and really good tasting vodka. We don't run that every day, it's just as needed. So one of the things we always talk about here is the fact that, we're always needing more whiskey. We need to make more. We're expanding, doing a lot of work. So this is what the beginning stages of phase 2 for our distillation. And we're in the middle of basically adding on to our still house. We're going to double in size. We're going to put in another 7-foot column, and then it'll give us the ability to make a couple thousand barrels a day of whiskey, and then we'll continue to expand from there. But this is just the next phase of our expansion. So again, when people say more whiskey, we're in the middle of spending, this project alone is about $20 million. And this summer and next summer, we're going to spend about $120 million in expansion so we can make more whiskey.
Yeah, all in the name of making more.
Make more whiskey, yes. This tank over here is a beer, we call it a beer well. So we're taking all that beer combined in the fermenters, and we pump into the beer well, and it's really a charge tank for our still. And we're able to get positive pressure, and we can pump it into our stills and have a consistent influence. And then what comes out of the bottom of the still, so it goes through the still, we strip out the really good whiskey, and then what comes out of the bottom, everything is used here. We don't have any waste. The thin stuff goes back into a tank that's screened and into a tank, and that's what we use as setback to sour our fermenters. And the thick passes across the screen, and then we run it to our dry house and turn it into cattle feed. So everything that comes in is used. We have no waste.
So this is basically the last step of it either goes in this tank or in a barrel.
That's right. Yep. We separate the whiskey from the cattle feed, what it's left over. We dry it into a feed, and then we sell that as well.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the expansion. Looks like some major work here as well as the fermenters and the cookers. What's it mean for overall capacity and what you can do from before to now or in the future?
Yeah, one of the things for us, the cooking capacity, we went ahead and expanded that cooking capacity to where it will meet both of these distillation columns. Before last year, we were only running our distillation column for 18 hours a day. And so now we're running it 24 hours a day, and we're able to make about 1,000 barrels a day of whiskey. Once this distillation column gets put into place, we'll double that capacity up to a couple thousand barrels a day. And we got more fermenters going in, we got more another dry house being installed, and then we're always building warehouses, because one of the things for us is we have the oldest inventory in the business. In order to have the oldest inventory, you have to have the most storage. If your average age is 8 years old for your whiskey, you've got to have double the storage that a lot of your competitors only have 4 years of storage. So we have to have a lot of storage, so we're in the middle of building a lot of warehouses.
I think we're going to be talking about that next week, the warehouse expansion.
That's right.
Yeah, that's going to be great. This is a working distillery, as you can see. Maybe tell the people, when the visitors come back, what should they expect to see when they come back?
Well, one of the things we hope, you'll see, we've been publicly saying we're under construction. So when you come to see us, hopefully soon, we'll have these buildings going into place, and everywhere you see, we'll have some construction sites. But all the while, we're still making whiskey. So we're not shutting down the distillery. We're continuing to make the whiskey, and we have no plans of shutting down.
Well, we're at about 12 minutes or so. We like to keep these around 15 minutes, but we do have some questions.
Yeah.
On Buffalo Trace Distillery on Facebook, Ned asks, when the mash is distilled, what is the percentage of alcohol when it comes off the still?
Yeah, one of the things, we have multiple recipes. We have a lot of experiments, but our standard, we have 7 big recipes, and each of those 7 have a standard desired proof at the end. So we'll vary that depending on the recipe that we're producing. But so it can range anywhere from 130 proof up to 140 proof, depending on which recipe we're running.
Carol on Buffalo Trace Distillery Facebook has an interesting question about cuts. She asked, do different portions of the cuts during distillation go to assigned brands, or is the entire cut the same?
Well, each cut is a little different. So depending on which proof that we're running for the day and which recipe that is, we'll have a different amount, we call it reflux, through the still. And what that does is generate different tails and heads cuts on a daily basis. So it really depends on, it is based on the recipe that we're running for that day.
And maybe talk about cuts just a little bit, the heads, hearts, and tails.
Generally we'll run the beer still on a continuous basis. So once we get that beer still running, you'll run that until, you can't run it constantly. You have to shut that beer still down and flush it out, clean it. And in between those runs, we'll have to cut that tails out. We have a heads and tails tank at in the still house where you can cut those out and not use those. So it just depends on the recipe.
And Kurt is asking, during the distillation process, what variable can have the greatest impact on the whiskey?
Well, distillation is one of those things. It's one of the big, I call it the big 4, when you've got recipe and distillation and aging, and you got these, and cooking. And so with these big processes, distillation is really important, because that's where you separate that whiskey out. And proof is probably the #1 component, because you're measuring, how much alcohol you have in that product at the end of the day. Yeast is really important, because that determines how much different types of alcohol you have. But the amount of alcohol is measured by proof, and that's probably the biggest variable.
Gotcha. I'm also wondering, as we're standing here, the still and the still house is over on this side of campus, and you pump into barrels way over across campus. How do you physically get all the whiskey over there?
Well, we actually have a whiskey pipe, a whiskey line, downstairs that we'll have a finishing tank, and then we'll pump it through that whiskey line, and it goes overhead all the way over to the other side of that water tower. We call it the cistern room, and there's a tank farm there, and we'll fill those tanks and get them cut and ready for barrels. So it's probably about a mile long pipe that goes from here to there. And we're under construction.
Under construction. Well, we're about 15 minutes, Harlen. Anything you'd like to say to close it out this week?
I appreciate you joining us, and hopefully you learned a little bit about how we're doing things, and we got some more stuff coming next week, so thanks for joining.
Great.